It was a storm like no other. The trees swayed in the wind, their trunks groaning under the weight of the rain. Thunder cracked, jagged and furious, while the skies darkened, swallowing the mountain. The forest, usually a place of tranquility, had turned into a churning beast of its own, as though nature itself had lost its calm. In the midst of this chaos, one small figure wandered alone, her heart pounding against her chest as if in rhythm with the storm. Lily Thompson, no older than 10, had always been drawn to the wild. The Appalachian Mountains loomed around her home, and while others in the small town spoke of the forest with fear in their eyes, Lily felt a pull. Her life in the town was one of quiet neglect. Her parents worked endlessly, their eyes often clouded with the weight of their responsibilities. So Lily learned to entertain herself, finding solace in the woods that whispered secrets only she seemed to hear. Despite the storm's warnings, Lily had ventured deeper into the forest. Her dark hair clung to her face, matted by the rain, and her small boots splashed in the growing puddles beneath her. The roar of thunder, the sharp crack of lightning, only urged her forward, her pulse quickening with the thrill of disobedience. She hadn't meant to wander so far, but something about the forest in the storm called to her perhaps. It was the way the wind whispered through the trees, or the way the clouds seemed to hold the mountain in their grasp. She had to see it, to feel it. Behind her, in the distance, the small town of Ashwood was bathed in the dull glow of street lamps. The townsfolk were safe in their homes, unaware of the little girl lost in the storm. Their minds were preoccupied with more pressing matters. The storm was wild, and the town's ancient stories were always told in hushed voices when it raged this fiercely. The beast was out there, somewhere in the mountains, prowling the shadows of the forest. They called it the guardian of the mountain, and their fear of it ran as deep as the roots of the trees. The beast, the townspeople would say, was a massive bara creature larger than any natural beast should ever be. They spoke of its black fur, its eyes like burning coals, its massive paws that could crush boulders. Some believed it had lived in the mountains for centuries, guarding the forest from those who would harm it. Others said it was a monster, a myth, crafted to keep the curious at bay. But Lily knew better. She had seen it once before, in the distance, just before the wind drove it back into the shadows. No one understood the bear like Lily did. Most of the town feared it, but she could never shake the feeling that the creature wasn't a threat, but a guardian, a protector of the wild, perhaps even of her own spirit. Tonight, the storm was worse than it had ever been. The wind howled like a living thing, and the rain lashed at Lily's face. The forest, once familiar, now seemed like an alien world, disorienting and threatening. She had wandered too far. The trees were no longer friendly. They loomed over her like giants in a nightmare, the shadows beneath their branches growing deeper with each passing minute. Her heart began to race, panic creeping into her veins. The storm was closing in on her, and she had no idea where she was. Her breath caught in her throat as a crash of thunder split the air. So close she thought the very ground might shake beneath her feet. She was lost, terrified, alone. But then something else, a sound. A presence, heavy and still. She stopped dead in her tracks, straining her ears against the wind. A rustle in the underbrush. Something large, moving closer. Her breath hitched in her throat. Lily wasn't sure if she should run, or if she should stay as still as the trees around her. Her instincts screamed at her to flee. But then she thought of the bear. Could it be the same one? Had it been watching her from the shadows? The wind howled once more, drowning out all other sounds. But Lily's eyes narrowed. She wasn't sure whether it was courage or foolishness, but something inside her made her stand her ground. Whatever it wasn't the storm she had to fear. Lily's feet sank deeper into the mud with every step, and yet she couldn't bring herself to stop. The storm, fierce and unrelenting, seemed to consume everything in its path. The trees creaked and groaned, their branches whipping violently in the wind. The familiar path she'd taken to explore the forest now seemed foreign, twisted, as if the storm had changed the very nature of the land itself. Her soaked jacket clung to her skin, the rainwater running down her back in cold rivulets. The world was a blur of gray skies, gray trees, gray shadows moving in the corners of her vision. It was a landscape that felt alive with danger, its silent threats only interrupted by the thunder's deafening roar. But Lily wasn't afraid. Not yet. She had never felt more alive. For all the storm's fury, she was caught in a moment of strange clarity, as though the forest was speaking to her, telling her things only she could understand. The call to explore had always been with her, but tonight it felt deeper. She needed to be here, in this moment, lost in the wild. She hadn't expected the storm to come so quickly. The clouds had rolled in fast, swallowing the sky whole before she had a chance to turn back. Now the wind was pushing her further, dragging her deeper into the wilderness. The path she'd been following was now indistinguishable, swallowed by the fury of the storm. Lily took a shaky breath, her heart pounding as her feet slid over the slick earth. She wiped her brow, but the rain quickly replaced it, leaving her face cold and wet. Her eyes darted around the forest, searching for something familiar, anything that could help her find her way back. But there was nothing. The trees loomed like sentinels, their dark silhouettes shifting with the howling wind. The storm had turned the forest into an alien world, one where the familiar sounds of birds and rustling leaves had been replaced by the roaring of the tempest. The forest was no longer her friend, it was an untamable force that had swallowed her whole. Lily's chest tightened. She tried to remember the way back. Had she turned left or right at the last fork in the path? She couldn't remember. Panic began to seep into her bones. She wasn't sure how long she had been wandering, but the storm showed no signs of letting up. The wind felt like a living thing now, biting at her skin, trying to pull her deeper into the forest's embrace. She stopped, her feet too tired to take another step. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she struggled to calm herself. But it was no use. She was lost, completely alone. The realization hit her like a cold slap. She couldn't do this alone. She wasn't strong enough to face the wild, not without help. The storm roared louder as if to mock her weakness. For a moment, Lily stood there, her heart racing. She thought about her parents. Would they be looking for her? They would be worried. She was supposed to be home by now. Her mind raced, but no answers came. Only more questions. She didn't know which way to go. She didn't know where to turn. And then, just as she was about to crumble under the weight of her fear, something else cut through the storm. A distant sound. At first, it was so soft, so faint, she thought it was just the wind. But then it came again, a low, rumbling growl, vibrating through the earth beneath her feet. The sound wasn't like anything she had ever heard before. It wasn't a wolf's howl or the crack of thunder. No, it was something different. Something much, much larger. Her breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. It had to be the wind. But then the growl came again, this time closer, louder, more menacing. Lily's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to do. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but the storm was all around her and the forest seemed endless, full of shadows and hidden dangers. Then something massive moved in the underbrush, just beyond her sight. A massive shape, dark and hulking, outlined by the flashes of lightning. Her heart froze. She didn't have to see it to know what it was. The beast. It was here. And this time, Lily wasn't so sure she could outrun it. The wind howled through the trees like 1,000 wailing voices. But in that moment, Lily's focus narrowed to one thing, the shape in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the storm's fury. Her body froze as a low, guttural growl rumbled through the underbrush. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't an attack. It was something else, something primal, something ancient. The beast was close. Lily had heard the stories. She'd heard the whispers in the town, in the local tavern, and in the hushed voices of children who were too afraid to go near the woods. The guardian of the mountain, they called it. A creature of legend, massive and terrifying. Its fur was black as night, its eyes like burning coals, and it was said to roam the deepest corners of the forest, guarding the land from intruders. The townspeople spoke of it in fearful reverence, as if it were a force of nature itself. They didn't venture near its domain, and the elders warned the children to stay out of the wood at all costs. Lily had always felt differently. She had always been fascinated by the idea of the bear, not as a monster, but as a protectora, silent sentinel who watched over the land. But now, faced with the undeniable presence of the creature, Lily wasn't sure what she believed anymore. She held her breath, trying to steady her trembling legs. The growl, low and resonant, seemed to vibrate in the very air around her. The darkness between the trees shifted again, and Lily could make out the shape of the beast, its massive form moving with silent grace, the sheer size of it making the trees around it seem small and fragile. It was larger than she had ever imagined. Its eyes gleamed like fire in the night, and the air seemed to grow heavier with its presence. But there was no charge, no violent roar. The beast didn't move toward her in anger, it simply watched. Lily's heart raced in her chest. Her instinct told her to run, to get as far away from the creature as possible, but her feet felt like they were cemented to the ground. She wanted to scream, to call for help, but the words lodged in her throat, choked by the overwhelming fear that gripped her. The storm continued its fury above her, but it felt as if the whole world had fallen away, leaving only her and the creature in the clearing. The beast stepped forward, its massive paws making no sound on the wet ground, its presence somehow more intimidating in its stillness. Lily's breath hitched in her throat as it came closer, its dark fur glistening under the flashing lightning. The moment seemed to stretch, and for a brief second, time itself seemed to pause. The beast stopped just a few feet from her, its towering form casting a shadow that swallowed Lily whole. It stood there for a long moment, as if studying her, its glowing eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her shiver. There was something unsettling about the way it regarded her, like it was seeing right through her, into her very soul. Lily wanted to move. She wanted to run, but her body refused to obey. Her feet felt rooted in place, too heavy to lift. The storm raged on, its fury crashing all around her, but the air around the beast seemed to carry a strange calm. The creature sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring as it took in her scent. Lily couldn't help the way her pulse quickened, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She wanted to turn and run, but her body was frozen, caught in the gaze of this wild, misunderstood creature. It wasn't just watching her, it was waiting. Lily's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The beast didn't seem like a monster. It didn't seem angry or hungry. It seemed curious. But what did that mean? Was it going to attack her? Was it going to protect her? Was it something else entirely? The wind howled once more, tearing through the trees, and for a brief moment, the creature lowered its massive head, as if shielding itself from the storm. Lily could feel the tension in the air, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Then, without a sound, the beast stepped back. Slowly, deliberately, its massive body moving with an eerie grace. It turned, its dark fur blending with the shadows, and for a moment, Lily thought it would disappear into the storm. But before it did, the beast looked back over its shoulder at her one last time. Its gaze was different now. Not cold, not fearful. It was something else, something deeper. And then, the creature vanished into the night, swallowed by the darkness and the fury of the storm. Lily stood alone in the clearing, her heart pounding in her chest, the rain pouring down around her like 1,000 sharp needles. The wind continued its wild, erratic dance, but the presence of the beast was gone. She didn't know what to make of what had just happened, or what it meant for her future in the forest. But one thing was certain. She was no longer just a girl lost in the storm. Something had changed in the depths of the wild. Something had noticed her. The storm raged on, indifferent to Lily's growing sense of unease. She stood motionless in the clearing, her body trembling not from the cold, but from the overwhelming weight of what had just happened. The beast had vanished into the night, but its presence lingered in the air, heavy, charged, and somehow protective. Lily wasn't sure whether she should feel comforted or terrified, but what she did know was that she was still utterly lost. The forest, once a place of fascination and excitement, had turned into an unfamiliar labyrinth, twisted by the storm's wrath. Every shadow seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally, every gust of wind felt like a whisper from the unseen. She didn't know where to go anymore. The path she had been following had long since disappeared, swallowed by the wild fury of the storm. The trees were so dense now, so close together, that she could hardly see past them. The canopy above had turned into a dark, shifting ceiling of branches, blocking out what little light the stormy sky had to offer. The earth beneath her feet had become slick and treacherous, her boots sinking with each step, as if the very ground was trying to hold her in place, keep her from leaving. She wanted to scream, to call out for help, but the sound would have been swallowed by the storm. No one would hear her. No one could. The wind howled again, and Lily felt a shiver run down her spine. She could feel the weight of the forest around her, pressing in from all sides, its deep, silent gaze watching her every move. Every tree felt like an unblinking eye, and every gust of wind was a breath from something ancient and unknowable. Her heart raced, her chest tightening with each step. She knew the storm was growing worse, the rain falling in sheets, soaking her to the bone. She tried to push forward, but the thick mud made every movement feel like a battle. Her muscles burned from the exertion, and her legs grew weaker with each passing minute. How long had she been out here? Hours? Days? She couldn't tell. Time had lost its meaning in the forest. All that mattered now was getting out, finding her way back to the safety of home. But which way was that? Every direction looked the same, a blur of wet earth and dark trees. The storm had turned everything into a mirror of itself, and Lily was caught in its reflection. The wind picked up again, whipping her hair around her face, and she squinted into the oncoming darkness. Her vision blurred, the world swirling in a fog of rain and fear. She had no idea where she was anymore, no idea which way to go. The only thing that mattered was getting out. She had to get out. But as she pushed forward, her body exhausted and her hope fraying, a strange sensation washed over her, something subtle yet undeniable. She wasn't alone. At first, Lily thought it was just the forest playing tricks on her, the shadows making shapes in the rain. But then, just at the edge of her awareness, she felt Ida's presence. A heavy, unyielding energy that seemed to breathe in rhythm with the storm. The beast, it was watching her. Lily's heart skipped a beat, but this time she didn't feel the same terror that had gripped her earlier. She didn't know why, but there was something in the air, something in the very silence that surrounded her, that made her believe know that the creature wasn't here to harm her. The air around her seemed to thrum with its energy. It was there, hidden in the shadows of the trees just beyond her sight. She could feel its presence like a force pressing against her, urging her to keep going. It wasn't the same fear she had felt before. This was something different. It was a weight, a pressure that bore down on her, but it wasn't hostile. It was protective. She kept walking, her steps more deliberate now, as if the very forest itself was guiding her. The growl from before echoed again in the distance, distant yet comforting, a low rumble that reverberated through her chest. She didn't stop. There was no need to. It was as if the beast had decided she wasn't a threat, just a small, lost thing in need of guidance. Lily's breath steadied as she pushed through the storm. The wind roared around her, but now it felt like it was pushing her forward, as if nature itself had taken her under its wing. She could feel the beast's eyes on her, guiding her, watching her with a steady, unwavering focus. With every step, she moved further from the terror of the unknown, closer to something that felt strangely like safety. The forest, once a place of confusion and fear, now felt like a space where she could breathe. The weight of the storm seemed less oppressive, the darkness less suffocating. She didn't know where the beast was leading her, but for the first time that night, she didn't care. She just followed its presence, trusting that it knew the way, trusting that it understood this land far better than she ever could. The storm's fury continued to rage around them, but Lily moved with purpose now. She wasn't just a lost child anymore. She was something more, something that the wild had accepted into its fold. The beast, somewhere in the shadows, was waiting. The storm refused to relent. The rain poured down in sheets, the wind tearing through the trees with an unforgiving howl. Yet, as Lily moved deeper into the forest, something strange began to happen. The chaos around her seemed to fade, replaced by a silence that was almost suffocating. It wasn't that the storm had ceased, but rather that the presence of the beast seemed to create a quiet within her own soul. It was as though the forest had divided itself into two halves, the violent world of the storm and the calm, still place where the creature watched over her. She lowered her hands slowly, the connection between them still strong, undeniable. The rain continued to fall. The storm still raged on, but for the first time that night, Lily didn't feel alone. The storm seemed to rage with renewed fury, as though it were testing the very earth itself. The wind screamed through the trees, the lightning splitting the sky, and the thunder rolled with an ancient power, reverberating through the mountains. But in the space between the roars of the storm, there was an undeniable stillness, a quiet sanctuary at the center of the chaos. Lily, though drenched and exhausted, found herself no longer afraid. The beast stood beside her, as if a silent guardian in the heart of the storm, its massive form a hulking shield against the wrath of nature. For reasons she couldn't explain, Lily felt safer in its presence than she had ever felt before, even in the midst of the worst storm she had ever seen. She glanced up at the creature, her wide eyes filled with a mix of awe and something deeper, a trust that had taken root without her realizing it. The beast was watching her now, its glowing eyes softening in the dim light, its chest rising and falling steadily with each breath. It was the first time she had seen the creature up close like this, and despite its terrifying size and reputation, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of connection. As the storm raged around them, the beast moved, its powerful frame shifting through the trees with eerie grace. It led her silently deeper into the forest, its large body cutting a path through the underbrush. Lily followed, not questioning its actions, but simply trusting the quiet strength that emanated from the creature. It was as if the forest had parted for them, leaving them in a protective bubble, shielded from the worst of the storm. The trees grew denser, the rain pouring harder, but the ground beneath her feet became steadier. The beast had led her to a small, sheltered clearing, a hollow nestled between towering oak trees. The space was relatively dry, protected from the worst of the wind and rain by the thick canopy above. A small stream ran through the clearing, its waters now swollen from the downpour, but the sound of the rushing water was oddly soothing, almost like a lullaby to her weary soul. Lily stood for a moment, her legs trembling beneath her, trying to comprehend how she had arrived here, how she had ended up in the company of this creature, this force of nature, who seemed so at ease in the chaos of the world. The storm continued its ferocious onslaught, but in this small haven, it felt distant, muted. The beast lay down beside the stream, its enormous frame taking up most of the space in the clearing. Its massive head rested on its large paws, its eyes still alert, but no longer watching with the same intensity. There was a calmness now, a peace that seemed to radiate from the creature, as if it knew exactly what the night held in store. Lily, exhausted and trembling, sank to the ground beside it. The cold had seeped deep into her bones, and though the shelter offered some relief, the chill of the storm still lingered. She pulled her arms around herself, trying to preserve warmth as best as she could, but it wasn't enough. Her clothes clung to her, drenched and heavy, and her head ached from the strain of the storm and her nerves. The beast didn't seem to mind the rain. It lay there, unmoving, but there was something almost protective in the way it hovered near her. It wasn't just sheltering her physically from the worst of the weather, it was sheltering her emotionally too. Every moment spent beside it seemed to soothe the panic that had once gripped her heart, replacing it with an unspoken sense of safety. Then, as if on cue, the beast lifted its head and sniffed the air. Its eyes flickered toward the dark woods beyond the clearing, and for a brief moment, Lily thought she saw a flicker of something most like concern in the creature's gaze. Without a sound, it rose to its feet, moving with a silent power, and padded toward the edge of the clearing. Lily watched, her eyes wide, wondering what the beast had sensed. Had it detected something dangerous? Was there another threat in the forest? Her mind raced with possibilities, but her body was too tired to follow. The beast stood still for a moment, its head lowered, nostrils flaring as it surveyed the perimeter of the clearing. It was a protector, and Lily could see that now more than ever its movements were deliberate, controlled, as if it was guarding them from something unseen. The storm was fierce, but the beast was fiercer. It was as if the entire forest recognized the creature's authority, and even the wind itself seemed to bend to its will. She lowered her hands slowly, the connection between them still strong, undeniable. The rain continued to fall. The storm still raged on, but for the first time that night, Lily didn't feel alone. The storm seemed to rage with renewed fury, as though it were testing the very earth itself. The wind screamed through the trees, the lightning splitting the sky, and the thunder rolled with an ancient power, reverberating through the mountains. But in the space between the roars of the storm, there was an undeniable stillness, quiet sanctuary at the center of the chaos. Lily, though drenched and exhausted, found herself no longer afraid. The beast stood beside her, as if a silent guardian in the heart of the storm, its massive form a hulking shield against the wrath of nature. For reasons she couldn't explain, Lily felt safer in its presence than she had ever felt before, even in the midst of the worst storm she had ever seen. She glanced up at the creature, her wide eyes filled with a mix of awe and something deeper, a trust that had taken root without her realizing it. The beast was watching her now, its glowing eyes softening in the dim light, its chest rising and falling steadily with each breath. It was the first time she had seen the creature up close like this, and despite its terrifying size and reputation, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of connection. As the storm raged around them, the beast moved, its powerful frame shifting through the trees with eerie grace. It led her silently deeper into the forest, its large body cutting a path through the underbrush. Lily followed, not questioning its actions, but simply trusting the quiet strength that emanated from the creature. It was as if the forest had parted for them, leaving them in a protective bubble, shielded from the worst of the storm. The trees grew denser, the rain pouring harder, but the ground beneath her feet became steadier. The beast had led her to a small, sheltered clearing, a hollow nestled between towering oak trees. The space was relatively dry, protected from the worst of the wind and rain by the thick canopy above. A small stream ran through the clearing, its waters now swollen from the downpour, but the sound of the rushing water was oddly soothing, almost like a lullaby to her weary soul. Lily stood for a moment, her legs trembling beneath her, trying to comprehend how she had arrived here, how she had ended up in the company of this creature, this force of nature, who seemed so at ease in the chaos of the world. The storm continued its ferocious onslaught, but in this small haven, it felt distant, muted. The beast lay down beside the stream, its enormous frame taking up most of the space in the clearing. Its massive head rested on its large paws, its eyes still alert, but no longer watching with the same intensity. There was a calmness now, a peace that seemed to radiate from the creature, as if it knew exactly what the night held in store. Lily, exhausted and trembling, sank to the ground beside it. The cold had seeped deep into her bones, and though the shelter offered some relief, the chill of the storm still lingered. She pulled her arms around herself, trying to preserve warmth as best as she could, but it wasn't enough. Her clothes clung to her, drenched and heavy, and her head ached from the strain of the storm and her nerves. The beast didn't seem to mind the rain. It lay there, unmoving, but there was something almost protective in the way it hovered near her. It wasn't just sheltering her physically from the worst of the weather, it was sheltering her emotionally too. Every moment spent beside it seemed to soothe the panic that had once gripped her heart, replacing it with an unspoken sense of safety. Then, as if on cue, the beast lifted its head and sniffed the air. Its eyes flickered toward the dark woods beyond the clearing, and for a brief moment, Lily thought she saw a flicker of something most like concern in the creature's gaze. Without a sound, it rose to its feet, moving with a silent power, and padded toward the edge of the clearing. Lily watched, her eyes wide, wondering what the beast had sensed. Had it detected something dangerous? Was there another threat in the forest? Her mind raced with possibilities, but her body was too tired to follow. The beast stood still for a moment, its head lowered, nostrils flaring as it surveyed the perimeter of the clearing. It was a protector, and Lily could see that now more than ever its movements were deliberate, controlled, as if it was guarding them from something unseen. The storm was fierce, but the beast was fiercer. It was as if the entire forest recognized the creature's authority, and even the wind itself seemed to bend to its will. Lily shivered, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. She didn't know how long the storm would last or how long they would remain here, but she couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The beast had taken her in, not because it had to, but because it had chosen to. It had protected her when she was alone, and now, in the midst of this storm, it continued to do so without hesitation. The rain began to slow, the wind dying down just slightly, as if the storm itself was ready to rest. The clearing remained still, but for Lily, the silence felt like an embrace. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the rain against the leaves and the steady breathing of the beast calm her. She didn't know what the morning would bring, or if the storm would return with even greater fury. But for now, in this moment, she felt as though she was exactly where she was meant to be. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to relax, to close her eyes and trust in the wild world around her. With the beast beside her, she knew, somehow, that she would be okay. And as she drifted off into a restless sleep, the last thing she heard was the soft, steady growl of the creature beside her, a reminder that she was not alone. The morning light came slowly, creeping through the damp canopy above. The storm had passed, though the forest was still heavy with the scent of wet earth and the distant sound of trickling water. The air was thick with the quiet aftermath of a storm that had unleashed its fury on the mountain. But now, the wild seemed to settle, its restless energy calmed, its breath steady. Lily woke with a start, her eyes blinking open in the half-light of the forest clearing. Her body ached, every muscle sore from the cold, the damp, and the exhaustion of the night before. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, trying to shake off the remnants of her dreams. But the first thing she saw wasn't the familiar comforts of home, wasn't the small town she'd grown up in. It was the beast, still lying beside the stream, its massive body partially obscured by the underbrush. Its eyes were closed, but there was an undeniable stillness about Ida quiet power that seemed to ripple through the very air around them. Lily's heart fluttered in her chest. For a moment, she forgot where she was, disoriented by the vastness of the wilderness around her. It took a few seconds for the fog to lift, and for her memory to return in full force. The storm, the fear, the creature in the dark, and then the realization came crashing in. She wasn't in the town anymore. She wasn't with her parents or her friends. She was alone, stranded deep in the heart of the Appalachian wilderness, with a creature of myth, a beast that the entire town feared, as her protector. And yet, despite the weight of her situation, despite the uncertainty that clung to her like a second skin, Lily felt something she hadn't expected: peace. The beast had stayed with her through the night, never straying far from her side. It had protected her from the storm, shielded her from the worst of the weather, and kept watch over her while she slept. She could see now, more clearly than ever before, how the creature moved through the forest with an instinctual grace, an ease that only came with being one with the land. She watched it closely, still unable to fully comprehend the depth of its quiet strength. The beast hadn't once shown any sign of aggression. It had never threatened her. It had only protected, guided, and watched over her. Every movement, every pause, every breath it was all deliberate, all part of a rhythm that only the wild could understand. Lily, still stiff and cold, got to her feet. She stretched her arms overhead, wincing as her joints cracked in protest. She was hungry, thirsty, and bone-tired, but there was something more pressing than her discomfort: the need to understand, the need to know what this creature was, what it wanted, and why it had taken her under its wing when it could have easily turned away. The beast, sensing her movement, opened its eyes. The glow in those amber depths softened as they met hers, and for a moment there was no wild, no forest, no separation between them. It was just Lily and the beast, staring at each other, as though the creature were waiting for her to make the next move. Lily stepped forward, tentatively, her gaze never leaving the creature. She wanted to reach out, to touch it again, to feel the warmth of its body and the softness of its fur beneath her fingers, but there was hesitation in her step. She was still a child in a world that was much bigger than her, still someone trying to make sense of something that was far beyond her comprehension. Lily knew the creature wasn't just her protectorate, was the protector of everything in this forest, and the more she watched it, the more she realized how wrong the stories about it had been. The town feared the beast, casting it as a monster, a force of destruction, when in truth, it was the forest's heart and soul. It had been watching over these woods for generations, guarding the delicate balance of nature. The fear the townspeople held it was the fear of the unknown, of things they couldn't control or understand. It was easy to demonize what one didn't understand. But now, Lily knew the truth. She had seen it with her own eyes. The beast wasn't a monster, it was a guardian. Her thoughts were interrupted when the beast turned its head toward her, its glowing amber eyes locking onto hers. There was something in that gaze, a deep understanding, a quiet acceptance. It was as if the creature could sense her thoughts, could see the transformation happening within her. It stood still, watching, waiting for her to make the next move. Lily took a slow, steady breath. She had been afraid of this creature once had believed the stories that painted it as a savage, untamable beast. But now, standing before it, she knew those fears were nothing more than shadows. Shadows cast by ignorance, by misunderstanding. She moved forward, slowly, hesitantly at first, but the beast remained still, as if allowing her the space to decide. Her feet felt heavy as she walked toward it, the ground soft and damp beneath her boots. The air felt thick with anticipation, but Lily didn't stop. She had to let go of the fear. She had to. If she was going to survive in this wild place, if she was going to make her way back to the town, back to the people who had no idea what she had learned, what she had come to understand, she needed to break free of the chains of fear that had held her captive all her life. When she reached the beast, it lowered its massive head toward her once more, those glowing eyes never leaving hers. Lily reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the soft fur of its neck. The moment her skin made contact with the creature, she felt a wave of warmth deep, comforting energy that seemed to pulse from the very core of the animal. It was the same feeling she had gotten the night before when the beast had protected her from the storm, but this time it was different. This time it was more personal. It was as though the creature had invited her into its world, had offered her a place within the wild, within its protection. And as Lily stood there, her hand resting gently on the beast's fur, she realized something profound. She wasn't just a child lost in the woods, she was part of something much larger than herself. The wild, the forest, the creatures within it, they were not enemies to be feared. They were part of the same pulse that ran through her veins. The chains of fear, the chains that had bound her to the town's narrow, fearful view of the world, began to crumble. She was free. Free to understand, free to see the world as it truly was. and free to know that the beast, despite all the stories, despite all the fears, was not her enemy. It was her guardian, and together they would face whatever came next. The days in the wilderness seemed to stretch on endlessly. What had once felt like a moment of sheer panic, a desperate escape from the storm, had slowly shifted into a new rhythm of survival, of quiet understanding. The beast was her guide, her protector, and Lily had come to trust it with every step she took through the dense forest. But now, the time had come. The forest had told its story, had shown her a side of life she had never imagined. But the pull of home, the pull of the town was undeniable. As much as she had grown fond of the wild, as much as she had learned to trust the beast, Lily knew that she couldn't remain here forever. There were people waiting for her, people who loved her, who would be desperate to see her safe again. And yet, as she stood at the edge of the clearing, staring out into the trees that stretched for miles in every direction, Lily felt a pang of sadness. The beast stood just behind her, its massive form watching with an almost knowing presence, as if it too understood that this chapter of their story was nearing its end. The creature hadn't spoken, of course, but in the quiet, in the stillness of the forest, Lily had come to understand its every movement. It wasn't just a beast. It was a guardian, a part of this land, and in some strange way, a part of her journey. And though she had learned to love the creature's calm and fierce strength, there was still a bond-in, unspoken connection that made saying goodbye feel impossibly hard. "You've been so kind to me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The words hung in the cool air, almost swallowed by the vastness of the forest. But they were real, undeniable. She had never felt so small, so vulnerable in her life. But she also knew she was no longer the same girl who had first wandered into the woods. The fear that had once paralyzed her was gone, replaced with a quiet understanding of her place in the world. The beast shifted, its large head lowering just slightly, as if listening to her. Its eyes glinted with something that Lily couldn't quite name, a mixture of affection, understanding. It was hard to say. The creature had never needed words to communicate with her. Its presence, its every action had been enough. She took a deep breath, swallowing down the lump in her throat. The path home was calling her, but leaving the beast behind wasn't easy. In some strange way, Lily had come to realize that she didn't just need the beast to survive in the wilderness. She had needed it to survive the pain of being lost, in her own life, in her own world. The wild had taught her more about herself than she could have ever imagined, and the beast had been her guide. "Thank you," she said again, this time more firmly, as if offering the words like a gift to the creature who had given her so much more. With one final look at the beast, Lily turned her back to the clearing, stepping cautiously onto the narrow trail that led through the dense trees. The path was familiar now, even in the stillness of the morning. She didn't know how long the journey would take, how far the forest stretched, or how close the town truly was, but she knew she couldn't stay. The world outside the forest was waiting for her. Behind her, the beast remained still, watching her retreating figure with its steady gaze. Lily felt its eyes on her, felt the weight of its presence even as she moved farther away. And as the distance between them grew, she realized that she would carry the beast with Harriet's lessons, its protection, its quiet strength long after she left the wilderness. She didn't know what the town would say when she returned. Would they believe her? Would they understand? After all, who could understand what she had experienced here in the woods, in the quiet company of a creature they had only ever feared? But it didn't matter. What mattered was that she had changed. What mattered was that no matter what happened, the beast had shown her a truth that the town could never take away. She was no longer the scared, overlooked girl who had run away into the storm. She was someone different, someone who had learned the value of silence, of trust, of understanding. And as she continued walking, feeling the weight of the path under her feet, Lily found that she was no longer afraid of the unknown. She had faced it in the heart of the wild, and had come through the other side, stronger, braver, and more certain of who she was. She didn't need the town's approval, nor its understanding, to know that what had happened here, what she had experienced with the beast, was real. The storm had passed. The wilderness was behind her now, but the lessons it had taught her would stay with her forever. The beast would always be with her, in the silence of the trees, in the stillness of the mountain air. Lily stumbled back into town as the sun began to dip below the horizon, its soft light casting long shadows over the familiar streets she had once taken for granted. The houses she passed were quiet, their windows dim with the coming evening. The town seemed unchanged, frozen in time, as if the storm had never happened, as if the wilderness had never called her away. But for Lily, everything had changed. She was tired, exhausted in ways she couldn't quite explain, yet there was a sense of peace about her that she had never known before. The weight of the wild still clung to her, but it was no longer a burden. It was a part of her now, and as she walked down the quiet road, her footsteps slow and steady, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow different. She had faced her fears, had walked beside a creature the town had always feared, and had come out the other side stronger, wiser. But the real challenge was still ahead. Her parents' house loomed ahead, its porch light flickering softly in the growing darkness. Lily's heart pounded as she approached. Would they believe her? Would they see the changes in her? Her mind raced, but her body continued its steady march forward. She had to return. She had to go home. The door opened just as she reached the porch, and there, standing in the doorway, was her mother. Lily's heart skipped a beat at the sight of her, a mixture of relief and apprehension flooding her chest. Lily? Her mother's voice was soft, strained, as if she had been holding her breath for days, weeks, months. Where have you been? We've been searching everywhere. But before she could finish, Lily rushed forward, throwing herself into her mother's arms. She was home. She was safe. "Oh, Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Her mother held her tightly, as if afraid to let her go, as if fearing that if she did, Lily would disappear again into the dark unknown. "You're back." Her mother's voice broke, a mix of relief and disbelief. "We thought," she pulled away, looking down at Lily with tear-filled eyes. "We thought you were lost for good." Lily nodded, unable to find the words. The town had been frantic in the days since she disappeared, searching the woods for any sign of her, but they had never ventured too far into the wilderness. They hadn't known what lay deeper in the forest. They hadn't known that the very thing they feared was the one thing that had saved her. Her father appeared from behind her mother, his face etched with worry, though it softened as he saw his daughter standing there, alive and whole. He stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her, and for a moment, Lily allowed herself to lean into the warmth of his embrace. They were safe now. She was safe. But her heart still ached. She couldn't help the feeling that something was missing, something she couldn't explain. She had come back to the people she loved, to the life she had left behind, but she was no longer the same. How could she explain the bond she had formed with the beast, with the wild? How could she make them understand? "Lily," her father began, his voice gentle but insistent. "Tell us what happened. Where did you go? How did you survive out there?" "We thought too was lost," Lily said quietly, her voice trembling. She pulled away from them, her gaze dropping to the ground. But I wasn't alone. Her parents exchanged confused glances, their brows furrowing. Lily had to look away. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, a truth they weren't ready to hear. "There was something in the woods," she said slowly, her voice steadying as she spoke. "A bear. The beast." Her mother's face went pale. Her father's eyes widened, but there was no surprise in them, only the same fear that had always been there, the fear of the creature that had haunted the stories of their town for generations. "The beast?" Her father's voice was hoarse, as if he were choking on the very name. "You were with it?" Lily nodded, her throat tightening. "Yes, it protected me. It kept me safe during the storm. Tu wasn't alone. I wasn't lost." Her parents stood in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. Lily could see the doubt in their eyes, the disbelief that she was telling the truth. The stories, the rumors, the warnings, they all rushed back into her mind, but she had to speak her truth. She had to make them understand. "The beast isn't what you think it is," she said quietly, her eyes never leaving her parents. "It's not a monster. It's a guardian. It protected me. It kept me alive when I had no chance. You have to believe me." But her words fell flat in the air between them. Her parents said nothing, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. They couldn't believe her not in the way she needed them to. Lily sighed, the weight of the forest pressing in on her once again. She wanted to say more, to explain how the beast had become a part of her, how it had shown her a new way of seeing the world, but the words wouldn't come. She had changed in ways they couldn't understand, and she couldn't make them see the truth she had found. "I'm tired," she said softly, turning away from her parents and stepping inside the house. She didn't have the strength to convince them anymore. The truth was there, clear in her mind, but it was a truth that they would have to find for themselves. As she lay in bed that night, staring out the window at the stars, Lily wondered if the town would ever see the beast the way she had, if they would ever come to understand the protector it truly was. But deep down, she knew that whether they did or not didn't matter. The beast had been her guardian, and no matter how far she was from the wild, she would carry that truth with her always. And somewhere, out there in the heart of the forest, the beast was still watching over her. Its presence, its strength, would always be a part of her story. The days after Lily's return passed in a blur. The town had welcomed her home with open arms, but there was a quiet discomfort in the air, an unspoken tension that lingered just beneath the surface. Her parents were relieved, of course, but they couldn't shake the unease that came with hearing their daughter speak of the beast. The same beast that had haunted their nightmares, that had been the subject of whispered warnings and fearful glances for as long as anyone could remember. Lily knew they didn't believe her not entirely. They listened, they nodded, but there was a doubt in their eyes, an uncertainty that she couldn't dispel with words. How could she? How could anyone truly understand what had happened in the wild, in the forest, unless they had seen it for themselves? The townspeople were the same. They gathered in the streets, in their small shops and homes, discussing Lily's return with a mixture of relief and skepticism. No one spoke of the beast aloud, not openly. It was too dangerous, too frightening to even consider. Yet the stories of the wild, of the storm, of Lily's miraculous return, began to weave their way through the fabric of town life. "It's the storm," people said. "It's the forest playing tricks on her. She must have wandered into the woods, gotten lost in the storm," another whispered. "There's no way she could have survived out there without help." But some of the townsfolk started to listen more closely, especially those who had seen Lily's eyes, heard the conviction in her voice. They began to wonder, could it really be true? Could the beast, the creature they had feared, the creature that had been the subject of so many stories, actually be more than the monster they had made it out to be? Lily had heard the whispers, of course. She had heard the rumors swirling around the town, the doubts, the disbelief. But she didn't mind. She had learned that the truth didn't always need to be acknowledged by others to be real. The wild had shown her something far more important than approval or validation. It had shown her a new way of seeing the world. Still, Lily couldn't help but feel a pang of longing when she passed by the forest's edge. The trees beckoned to her, the wild whispering its secrets just beyond the horizon. She missed the stillness, the quiet understanding that had existed between her and the beast. There was no place like it in the town. No place where she could truly be herself, where the weight of expectations and fear didn't hang over her every step. One afternoon, weeks after her return, Lily found herself standing at the edge of the forest once again. It was a different day from the storm, a calm, sunny afternoon, the kind of day when the world felt alive with possibility. The town was busy with the mundane sounds of everyday life, children laughing, carts rolling down the cobblestone streets, the hum of people going about their business. But Lily was elsewhere. She was standing on the threshold of the wild, looking into the dense trees where the shadows held their mysteries. Her parents had warned her not to go back, had begged her to stay away from the forest. They had no idea, of course, that the wild was no longer just a place of danger and fear for her. It was home in its own way. The beast had shown her a side of herself that no one in the town could understand, a side of her that longed for something deeper, something more meaningful than the simple life they lived. Lily stood there for a long time, lost in thought, when she heard something soft rustle in the trees. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but to her, it was unmistakable. She knew that sound. It was the movement of something large, something familiar. Her heart skipped a beat. The beast. Her eyes scanned the forest, but the creature was nowhere to be seen. Still, she felt its presence, the same steady watchfulness, the same unspoken connection. She knew the beast was out there, somewhere in the woods, still guarding the wild, still watching over the land. It had never truly left her. Lily smiled softly to herself, a feeling of peace washing over her. The beast was part of the forest, part of the land, and it would always be there, a protector of the wild, a guardian of the mountain. The town might never understand it, might never see the creature for what it truly was, but Lily didn't need them to. She knew the truth, and that was enough. Over time, the town began to change. The whispers of the beast, once filled with fear and suspicion, began to soften. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, people started to look at the forest differently. They stopped seeing it as a place of danger, a place where monsters lurked in the shadows. Instead, they began to see it as something worthy of respect. It wasn't a dramatic shift. There were no grand speeches, no loud declarations, but the change was real, and Lily could feel it in the way the town spoke of the forest, in the way they respected the land a little more. They started to leave offerings at the forest's edges, small gestures, a sign of respect, of gratitude. And though no one ever said it aloud, Lily knew that the beast's legend had begun to shift. It was no longer a monster to fear, but a guardian to honor. As the seasons changed and the wilds continued to thrive, Lily found herself returning to the forest whenever she could. The town was still her home, but the wilderness where the beast watched over all was where she truly belonged. The forest, the mountain, the wild, they were part of her now, as much a part of her as her heartbeat. And deep within the woods, Lily knew that the beast would always be there, a protector, a guardian, watching over her, watching over the land. The legend of the beast lived on, not as a tale of terror, but as a story of protection, of understanding, of the quiet bond that could exist between a wild creature and the lost child who had learned to see it for what it truly was. Years passed, and the small town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains continued to grow, its streets bustling with life, its people finding comfort in the rhythms of the seasons. The town had changed in ways that Lily had never imagined. The stories of the past, the tales of the beast, the warnings passed down through generations had not vanished entirely, but they had evolved. They had transformed into something new, something that held respect rather than fear. The beast, once feared as a monstrous creature lurking in the shadows of the forest, was now seen as something else entirely, a guardian, a protector of the land, a quiet, unwavering force that watched over the wilderness, ensuring that the balance between the wild and the people was maintained. The community no longer viewed the forest with trepidation. Instead, they approached it with reverence, acknowledging the power that lay beyond their homes, just beyond the borders of their town. It wasn't an easy transformation, nor one that had come without resistance. Some had fought against the idea of the beast being anything other than a danger. They couldn't reconcile the stories they had grown up with, the warnings etched into their minds, with the reality that Lily had come to know. But over time, as the forest continued to thrive, as people started to venture into the woods with a new sense of respect, the legend of the beast shifted from a tale of terror to one of awe. Lily, now a young woman, stood at the edge of the town one crisp autumn morning, looking out toward the dense expanse of trees that had once seemed so forbidding. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden hue over the landscape. The wind stirred the leaves, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth. She could feel the connection, the pull of the wilderness, the same pull she had felt as a child, the pull that had led her into the heart of the forest on that stormy day. She had returned to the forest many times since her first journey. Each time she found herself in the presence of the beast, the creature who had saved her, guided her, and taught her the true meaning of protection. The bond between them had never faded. It had only deepened, becoming an unspoken understanding that was as natural as the earth beneath her feet. The town had come to accept the beast, though they never truly understood it. They never truly knew what it was like to walk beside it, to feel the quiet power it exuded. But they no longer feared it, and that, Lily realized, was enough. The legend of the beast was no longer a story of dread. It was a story of coexistence, of a creature whose strength and wisdom had shaped the lives of those who had been brave enough to see it for what it was. As Lily stood on the edge of the forest, a familiar figure emerged from the trees, massive, dark, and powerful. The beast. Its fur rippled in the light, and its eyes gleamed with that same quiet knowing that Lily had come to recognize as its hallmark. There was no fanfare, no grand gestures. The creature simply stood there, watching her, as if waiting for her to speak. Lily smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. She didn't need to say anything. The bond between them was beyond words, beyond explanation. It was a connection forged in the wilderness, in the storm, in the silence between them. And though the world had changed, though the town had moved on, that bond remained as strong as ever. The beast took a step forward, its massive paws silent against the forest floor. Lily didn't flinch. She didn't need to. The creature's presence was no longer a threat. It was a reassurance, a reminder of the strength and beauty of the world that lay beyond the confines of the town. With a gentle huff, the beast lowered its head, a gesture of understanding, of respect. Lily stepped closer, placing a hand on its massive shoulder. The warmth of its fur beneath her fingertips, the steady rise and fall of its chest as it breathed, brought a sense of peace to her heart. The world was no longer divided between the town and the forest. It was all one, all connected, in a way that only she truly understood. As the years went on, the legend of the beast lived on, not as a tale of terror, but as a story of protection, of harmony, of the quiet strength that lay within the wilderness. The townspeople began to see the forest as a living, breathing entity, something that needed to be cared for, something that deserved respect. They no longer viewed it as an enemy to be conquered, but as a partner, as a place where the balance of life was maintained. And Lily, who had once been the lost, neglected girl, had become the bridge between the two worlds. She was no longer just the child who had wandered into the storm. She was the one who had learned from the wild, who had come to understand the importance of the forest, of the creatures that lived within it, and of the delicate balance that kept everything in harmony. The beast, the guardian of the mountain, had shown her that there was strength in silence, in stillness, and in the quiet acts of protection that went unnoticed by most. And now, as the town continued to grow, continued to evolve, Lily knew that the legacy of the beast would live on, not in fear, but in the hearts of those who came to understand the true nature of the world around them. With one final look at the forest, Lily turned back toward the town, where the sounds of life were just beginning to stir. The sun had risen fully now, casting its golden light over everything, and she knew that the wild would always be with her, a part of the world. The beast's legacy would never be forgotten,